The sun was setting over the quiet village of Chanderpur, casting long, golden shadows across the fields. The air was crisp, carrying with it the earthy scent of freshly turned soil. Arjun, a humble farmer with deep lines etched across his tanned face, wiped the sweat from his brow as he completed his day's work. His days were long and lonely, marked by the simple rhythm of tending to his crops and returning to his small, empty home. Arjun's life had always been solitary. He had once dreamed of having a family, laughter echoing through the halls of his home, but fate had kept him alone. The only sounds in his life were the rustling of leaves and the occasional distant murmur of the village market. Yet, despite the quiet, he found comfort in routine. But that comfort was also loneliness disguised in the fabric of everyday toil. One evening, as he packed his tools and prepared to head back, a faint, whimpering sound broke the silence. It was so soft that at first, he thought it was the wind. But as he stood still, listening intently, the noise came again, this time clearer, a cry that trembled in the still air. Arjun's heart clenched. He glanced around, the dimming light making it difficult to see. He followed the sound, curiosity laced with concern, and soon came upon a broken, abandoned cart leaning precariously by the edge of the road. Underneath the cart, he spotted a small, scruffy dog, curled up tightly as if trying to make itself invisible. Its fur was matted with dirt, patches missing entirely, and its ribcage was painfully visible beneath its skin. The creature's eyes, wide with fear and desperation, met Arjun's, and a soft whine escaped its throat. For a moment, they stood in silence, man and animal, studying each other in the fading light. Arjun could see the mistrust in the dog's eyes, a reflection of hardship and neglect. But there was something else too, a flicker of hope, as if it sensed that this might be the end of its suffering. Kneeling slowly so as not to startle the dog, Arjun extended his calloused hand. "It's okay, little one," he whispered, his voice softer than usual, almost a murmur. The dog flinched at first, but as Arjun's hand hovered just above its head, it took a tentative step forward, its body trembling with exhaustion and fear. "You must be hungry," Arjun said, his voice cracking slightly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the last bit of bread he had saved for his dinner. Breaking off a piece, he offered it to the dog, who stared at it for a moment, then darted forward to snatch it from his hand. It ate hungrily, eyes never leaving Arjun, who watched with a mixture of relief and sadness. This small creature, so battered by life, reminded him of himself, alone, surviving each day but yearning for something more. When the bread was gone, Arjun scooped the dog up gently, cradling it to his chest. It was surprisingly light, bones pressing against his arms. The dog shivered but did not struggle, its head sinking into the warmth of Arjun's embrace. As he carried the dog home, the sky turned darker, the stars emerging like silent witnesses to this newfound bond. Arjun's house was small and worn, a one-room dwelling that held only the bare essentials, a cot, a wooden table, and a cooking pot. He laid the dog down on an old blanket by the hearth and lit a small fire to warm the room. The dog watched him with wary eyes, its body coiled like a spring, ready to flee if needed. "It's all right, you're safe now," Arjun said as he poured a bowl of water and set it next to the dog. It sniffed cautiously before drinking, every movement hesitant, as if it couldn't believe its fortune. Arjun sat by the fire, the warmth creeping into his bones as he watched the dog. In the flickering glow, he could see its fur beginning to dry, revealing more scars and patches that told the story of a hard life. He reached out to stroke its back, and this time, the dog did not flinch. Instead, it closed its eyes for a brief moment, its breathing steadying. A strange sense of peace settled over Arjun. The silence that once suffocated him now felt different, filled with the soft crackle of the fire and the occasional sigh of the dog lying beside it. For the first time in years, his home felt less empty, less cold. He hadn't realized how much he needed this, needed to care and be needed in return. As the night deepened and the fire died down to glowing embers, Arjun whispered, "I think I'll call you Raja." The dog's ear twitched, as if acknowledging its new name. And so, under the watchful eyes of the moon and stars, began the story of a man who found hope in the unlikeliest of places and a dog who found a home after a lifetime of being lost. The morning sun spilled through the cracks of Arjun's old wooden shutters, casting golden beams across the room. Raja, now cleaner and more energetic, stretched on his makeshift bed by the hearth. His once dull eyes sparkled with a new light, and his tail wagged as he watched Arjun move about the small room, preparing breakfast. It had only been a few weeks since Arjun had found Raja, but already, the two had formed an unspoken bond. Every day, Raja followed Arjun to the fields, trotting at his heels as they moved between rows of crops. He'd sit patiently while Arjun worked, his eyes alert for any movement. Whenever a crow dared to swoop down and peck at the crops, Raja would burst into action, barking and chasing the bird until it flapped away in defeat. Arjun would laugh, a sound that hadn't echoed from his lips in years, and Raja would return, tongue lolling, with a satisfied look on his face. The villagers began to notice the change in Arjun. He had always been known as the quiet, solitary farmer, keeping to himself and never staying long enough to chat at the market. But now, when they saw him walking through the village with Raja trotting beside him, they'd greet him, and he'd nod back, sometimes even pausing to exchange a few words. "That dog has worked miracles," they'd murmur among themselves, nodding knowingly. One afternoon, as the sun began its descent and painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, Arjun packed up his tools and glanced at Raja. The dog stood a few feet away, staring intently at a patch of earth and wagging his tail. Intrigued, Arjun walked over. Raja pawed at the ground and looked up at him, barking lightly. Smiling, Arjun grabbed a spade and dug at the spot Raja had indicated. To his surprise, he unearthed a cluster of wild herbs, rare and valuable for their medicinal properties. "Good boy, Raja," Arjun said, ruffling the dog's fur as Raja barked proudly. It was as if Raja had a way of sensing things that Arjun couldn't see, as if he knew exactly how to bring fortune into their lives. That night, Arjun sat on his small wooden stool by the fire, sipping a bowl of soup made from the very herbs Raja had found. He placed a smaller bowl on the floor for Raja, who lapped at it with enthusiasm. "You're not just a dog, are you?" Arjun said, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Raja looked up, eyes gleaming with an intelligence that seemed to echo Arjun's sentiment. But their days weren't always filled with peaceful work and laughter. One afternoon, dark clouds rolled in unexpectedly, bringing with them a fierce storm. The wind howled, bending trees and tearing at the thatched roofs of the village huts. Rain lashed down, soaking the fields and turning the earth to sludge. Arjun hurried to secure his crops, fear gnawing at him as the storm intensified. Raja, sensing his master's distress, ran alongside him, barking at the sky as if to challenge the storm itself. Lightning flashed, followed by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the ground. Raja whimpered for a moment but stood his ground, pressing against Arjun's leg as they worked. Finally, drenched and exhausted, Arjun managed to secure the last row of crops. He fell to his knees, breathing hard, the rain mixing with sweat on his brow. Raja licked his face, nudging him as if to say, "We're not done yet, you have to keep going." With Raja's encouragement, Arjun found the strength to make it back to their home. The wind banged the shutters wildly, and water seeped in through the cracks, but they were safe. Arjun lit a fire, and they huddled together, shivering but alive. As the storm raged on outside, Arjun wrapped an arm around Raja, feeling the dog's heartbeat steady against his own. "Thank you," he whispered, eyes closing as exhaustion overtook him. When morning finally came, the storm had passed, leaving behind broken branches and flooded paths. But despite the damage, Arjun felt a strange sense of peace. He looked at Raja, who stood by the door, tail wagging, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The storm had tested them, but they had emerged stronger, their bond now forged in shared struggle and mutual protection. Word spread through the village of how Arjun and his dog had braved the storm together. The villagers came by, offering help and supplies, their eyes filled with newfound respect. They saw that Arjun was no longer just the quiet farmer, he was a man with a companion who would stand by him no matter what, a man who had found strength not in solitude, but in the loyal heart of a dog. Raja had brought more than just comfort to Arjun's life, he had brought hope, resilience, and a reminder that even in the harshest of storms, there is always a light waiting on the other side. The winter that followed was one of the harshest Chandrapur had seen in decades. The fields that had once glistened with dewdrops and wild herbs now lay barren under a thick blanket of frost. The wind whistled through the cracks of Arjun's small home, biting at his skin and making each day a test of endurance. Food became scarcer with each passing week, and the villagers struggled to keep their families warm and fed. Despite the hardships, Arjun's concern was always divided between himself and Raja. The dog had become not just a companion, but a part of his very being. Whenever Arjun sat by the fire, trying to coax warmth into his fingers, Raja would curl up at his feet, his body a living shield against the cold. On nights when the winds roared like wild beasts, Arjun would wake to find Raja sitting at the door, ears perked and eyes scanning the dark, as if keeping guard against whatever unseen threats the winter brought. One day, as Arjun ventured into the village market, he found it eerily quiet. The usual chatter of the vendors and children playing in the streets was replaced by the low murmur of worry. The storm had been unrelenting, and even the most prepared households were now facing shortages. Arjun's own supplies were dwindling fast, and he knew he would have to make do with what little he had. Raja, sensing Arjun's quiet worry, stayed even closer than usual. His golden eyes, now sharper and more aware, never left Arjun's face. That evening, as Arjun sat hunched over a thin broth, he noticed Raja staring at him, head cocked to one side. He chuckled, a hollow sound. "I know, it's not much, is it?" he said, setting down a small bowl for the dog. Raja sniffed at the broth, then nudged the bowl back toward Arjun, sitting back with a firm wag of his tail. The gesture hit Arjun like a blow, a simple yet profound act of selflessness that brought a lump to his throat. "You need to eat, too," Arjun insisted, pushing the bowl back, but Raja wouldn't touch it. The dog's gaze said what words couldn't. "I'll go hungry so you don't have to." A few nights later, a piercing cold swept through the village. The wind was so strong it rattled the very bones of the house, and the fire struggled to stay alight. Raja lay curled in his usual spot, eyes shifting between the embers and the door. Suddenly, he sprang to his feet, ears pricked and body tense. Arjun sat up, alarmed. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Before he could move, Raja bolted to the door and barked, the sound urgent and sharp. The noise cut through the howling wind, and Arjun's heart thumped in his chest. He pulled on his coat and boots, grabbed his lantern, and opened the door to find Raja already bounding ahead, barking furiously. Outside, the night was a blur of wind and shadow. The cold bit at Arjun's face, but he followed Raja's lead without question. The dog guided him through the maze of darkened paths and broken branches until they reached the source of the alarm. In the distance, a glow flickered, fire, and not the controlled kind. The neighbor's house, a small, humble structure like Arjun's, was engulfed in flames. Panic surged through Arjun. He ran toward the house, shouting for help as he reached the door. From inside came the muffled cries of a woman and her 2 children. The village had no fire brigade, no plan for such disasters. All they had were themselves and whatever courage they could muster. Raja, sensing the urgency, barked and dashed inside through the open door, disappearing into the smoke. "Raja," Arjun called, fear squeezing his heart. He hesitated for only a moment before rushing in after his loyal companion. The air was thick, stinging his eyes and throat, but he could see Raja barking and pawing at the base of the wooden stairs where the family huddled, coughing and terrified. Guided by Raja's insistent barks, Arjun managed to reach them, ushering the children out one by one while Raja stayed at their side, herding them like a sheepdog. By the time they all stumbled into the cold, fresh air, other villagers had gathered, throwing buckets of water onto the flames. The fire hissed and spat, but their collective effort soon brought it under control. The family sat shivering but safe, their eyes wide with gratitude. Arjun sank to the ground, breathless and shaking, with Raja lying beside him, panting heavily but otherwise unharmed. One of the villagers approached, eyes wide with awe. "Arjun, you and your dog saved them. If not for Raja, we might have lost them tonight." Arjun reached out a trembling hand and rested it on Raja's head. "We did it together," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Raja licked his hand, eyes warm and full of understanding. That night, as the embers of the village's collective fire crackled under a starlit sky, Arjun sat with Raja by his side, the 2 of them wrapped in a blanket of quiet heroism. Through the bitter cold and raging fire, their bond had proven itself stronger than ever. In a world often marked by hardship, they were each other's light, each other's hope. Winter dragged on, relentless in its grip, The villagers of Chanderpur became used to seeing their breath as puffs of white each morning, and they wrapped themselves in layers of wool to battle the cold. Yet, despite the hardship, the tale of Arjun and Raja's bravery spread through the village like wildfire. It wasn't just a story of survival, it was one of loyalty and courage. Raja became a local hero, receiving pats and scraps from grateful villagers whenever he passed. Arjun, too, found himself in a position he hadn't known in years. The once isolated farmer now shared stories with his neighbors, his quiet life now woven into the fabric of the community. Still, he never forgot the struggles that winter brought, and he worried about the future. Food was scarce, and even with the shared resources of the village, Arjun knew he and Raja would need to search for more if they were to see spring. One frosty morning, Arjun decided to venture deeper into the forest, a risky move given the bitter cold and uncertain weather. "Raja, today we'll try our luck out there," he said, nodding toward the shadowy line of trees in the distance. Raja's ears perked up, and he barked once in agreement, eyes bright with the anticipation of a new adventure. The forest was dense, with branches that reached out like gnarled fingers and leaves that crunched beneath their feet. Snow lay thick on the ground, muffling their steps and turning every sound into a soft echo. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became until only their breaths and the occasional rustle of hidden creatures broke the silence. As they walked, Arjun spotted small game tracks and bent down to study them. His hunting skills, long unused, stirred within him. He set up a few traps, hopeful that luck would find them before nightfall. Raja stood guard, eyes scanning the horizon as if he understood the importance of their mission. Suddenly, Raja's stance shifted. His ears pinned back, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Arjun's heart skipped a beat as he turned to see what had triggered the reaction. Emerging from the thicket was a lone wolf, its fur thick and matted, eyes glinting with hunger. The harsh winter had made it desperate, just like them. Arjun's pulse quickened. He'd heard tales of wolves appearing during severe winters, searching for food in places they'd normally avoid. "Easy, boy," Arjun whispered, stepping backward slowly. But Raja stood his ground, body tense and tail stiff, a silent warning to the intruder. The wolf paused, gauging the pair. For a moment, time seemed suspended, the forest holding its breath. Then, as if deciding it was worth the risk, the wolf lunged forward. Arjun's shout echoed as he stumbled back, fear seizing him. But Raja was faster. With a snarl, he leapt at the wolf, intercepting it mid-charge. The two animals tumbled in a flurry of snow and fur, each trying to gain the upper hand. Arjun scrambled to his feet, searching for anything he could use as a weapon. His fingers closed around a fallen branch, sturdy and thick, and he rushed forward, heart thundering in his chest. "Raja!" he shouted, swinging at the wolf. The animal yelped as the branch connected, and it backed off, snarling before retreating into the forest, its eyes promising it would remember this encounter. Arjun dropped the branch and fell to his knees beside Raja, who lay panting heavily, a cut marring the golden fur of his shoulder. "Oh, Raja," Arjun said, voice shaking as he inspected the wound. It wasn't deep, but the sight of blood on his faithful friend sent a wave of fear and guilt through him. They had taken risks before, but this was too close, too real. Raja, sensing Arjun's distress, lifted his head and licked his master's hand, as if to say, "I'm okay. We're okay." Tears welled up in Arjun's eyes, and he laughed shakily, relief flooding him. "You brave, foolish dog," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He tore a strip from his coat and tied it around Raja's wound to slow the bleeding. "Let's get home." The journey back was slow, each step weighted with exhaustion, but Raja walked beside Arjun, limping only slightly. When they finally reached the village, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the snow-dusted rooftops. Villagers emerged to help when they saw them, their eyes wide with concern. They listened as Arjun recounted the encounter, their faces a mix of fear and admiration. That night, Raja lay by the fire, his wound cleaned and bound, his eyes drifting shut as warmth enveloped him. Arjun sat beside him, stroking his fur with a hand that was steady now. He whispered, "You saved me, yet again." Raja's tail wagged weakly, a small acknowledgement of their shared battle. The room was quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the soft, steady breathing of the dog who had become more than just a companion. He was a guardian, a symbol of unyielding loyalty in a world that often tested them beyond measure. As Arjun sat with Raja, he knew that no matter what trials lay ahead, they would face them together, heart and soul intertwined. Spring arrived slowly in Chanderpur, creeping in on the heels of long, cold nights. The snow melted away, revealing the brown earth beneath, dotted with the first signs of green. The villagers emerged from their homes, weary from the trials of winter but buoyed by the promise of new life. The village hummed with quiet excitement as people prepared to sow their crops and rebuild what the cold season had stripped away. Arjun, too, felt the change in the air. He stood at the edge of his field, the sunlight warm on his face, and took a deep breath. Beside him, Raja sat with his tail thumping softly against the ground. The wound from the wolf encounter had healed, leaving a thin scar, a testament to the battles they had fought and won together. Arjun glanced at his companion and smiled. "Ready for a new season, Raja," he said. The dog barked, his eyes bright with the same determination that had carried them through the harshest of days. Work in the fields was demanding, but Arjun welcomed it. With each turn of the soil, each seed carefully planted, he felt a sense of renewal. Raja, true to his nature, never strayed far. He trotted up and down the rows, occasionally pausing to chase a wayward butterfly or bark at the birds that dared to come too close to their patch of land. The sight of Raja's playful energy filled Arjun with a joy he hadn't known he was missing. One afternoon, as Arjun wiped the sweat from his brow and straightened up, he noticed a group of villagers approaching. At the front was Dev, an elder who rarely ventured from his home but commanded the respect of all. His white beard fluttered in the breeze as he walked, and his cane thudded rhythmically on the ground. Arjun's heart quickened. "Devji, to what do I owe the honor?" he asked, wiping his hands on his tunic and bowing slightly. Dev's eyes crinkled with warmth. "Arjun, we come with gratitude and a request," he said, his voice deep and steady. "You and Raja have shown us what it means to stand firm in the face of danger, to care for others when your own life is on the line. The village needs a protector, someone who embodies strength and loyalty. We'd like you to lead a group that will train dogs to guard and help our community." Arjun felt a lump form in his throat as he glanced down at Raja, who stood wagging his tail as if he understood every word. The thought of giving back to the village that had once seemed so distant, of building something larger than himself and his quiet, solitary life, sent a warmth through his chest. "I would be honored," he replied, his voice barely steady. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. Villagers brought their dogs to Arjun's field, and he, with Raja at his side, began to teach them how to respond to commands, guard their homes, and even assist in finding lost livestock or helping farmers with their work. Raja took to his new role with a seriousness that was both amusing and endearing. He would bark at the younger dogs when they strayed from their tasks and nudge them back into place, earning him the title of Master Raja among the village children. The bond between Arjun and Raja only deepened as they worked side by side, day after day. On one such day, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of orange and pink, Arjun sat on a rock, watching the trainees playfully chase each other under Raja's watchful eye. The village had come alive again, not just surviving but thriving. And for the first time, Arjun felt truly at peace, as though he had found his place, not just in the fields or within his home, but within the hearts of those around him. A young girl, no more than 6 years old with hair tied in 2 neat braids, ran up to Raja and threw her arms around him. Raja licked her cheek, his tail wagging wildly. The girl giggled and looked up at Arjun. "Thank you for sharing Raja with us, uncle," she said, her eyes bright with innocence and joy. Arjun smiled, the weight of years of loneliness lifting in that moment. "He's here for all of us now," he replied, his voice filled with quiet pride. As the sky deepened into dusk, Arjun called Raja over. The dog trotted up and sat beside him, leaning into Arjun's leg. Together, they watched the village, children playing, dogs barking, elders sharing stories by the fire. The air was filled with life, laughter, and the soft murmur of stories yet to be told. Arjun rested a hand on Raja's head, his touch gentle and grateful. "We did it, Raja. We made it through the dark." Raja's tail wagged, and he let out a content sigh, eyes closing as he pressed closer. The chapter of hardship had passed, leaving behind the bonds of friendship, resilience, and the unspoken promise that whatever the future held, they would face it together. In the quiet of the evening, as the first stars began to appear, Arjun and Raja sat side by side, knowing that love and loyalty had given them a new beginning.